In journalism, words matter, but not nearly as much as the photograph that accompanies them. A reporter can be fair or biased, kind or cruel, meticulous or careless, but ultimately, it's often the photo that determines how the subject reacts. It's the image that stirs emotions, sparks outrage, and turns a mild annoyance into full-blown fury. This week, that truth was on full display when former U.S. President Donald Trump lashed out at Time magazine for featuring what he called a super bad and worst of all time photo of him on their cover. Welcome viewers to my channel. Please subscribe, like my video and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. Trump's outburst, while typical in tone, was actually quite relatable. After all, most public figures, even those with thick skins, have their breaking point when it comes to unflattering photos. The Time cover in question shows Trump from a low angle, offering an unfiltered view up his nose. The lighting exaggerates every flaw. His neck folds resemble a sun-scorched ski slope, his eyes gleam with reptilian sharpness, and his hair appears wispy and disordered, like the delicate fluff of a newborn chick. Trump himself described it, in one of his early morning Truth Social posts, with typical flair. They disappeared, my hair, and then had something floating on top of my head that looked like a floating crown, but an extremely small one. The irony, of course, is that Trump isn't entirely wrong. The odd crown above his head was just a sun flare, but the photograph undeniably carries an awkward, even mocking energy. And while the accompanying headline, his triumph, was overtly positive, celebrating Trump's role in brokering a Gaza ceasefire described as a signature achievement, none of that mattered to him. For Trump, as for so many others, the words faded into irrelevance beside the image. It's easy to understand, in a human sense, why someone might be upset by a bad photo. Most people, no matter how confident or powerful, are deeply sensitive about how they look. Yet Trump, a man who once publicly mocked a disabled journalist and has built a career on derision, rarely inspires sympathy. In his case, many observers found it hard not to enjoy a little schadenfreude at his expense. Still, his complaint raised an interesting question: what was Time magazine trying to say with that photo? The debate spread quickly through media circles. Rival picture editors rushed to defend Time, arguing that the image was probably intended to portray Trump as a towering, commanding figure, the low-angle shot symbolizing power and dominance. But to most onlookers, it looked less like a portrait of authority and more like a deliberate act of subtle trolling. The cover seemed to wink at readers, as if saying, "Sure, we gave him a flattering headline, but at least he looks ridiculous." It's an old journalistic trick, as seasoned reporters know well. Newspapers and magazines have long used photography as a sly, underhanded weapon, a way to send a message they wouldn't dare print outright. You can write the most balanced story in the world, but if the photo catches your subject mid-blink, mid-grimace, or in a moment of awkward expression, you've already shaped the audience's perception. Even respectable publications like The Guardian, which avoids paparazzi shots, sometimes choose images that are less than kind. One writer recalled interviewing a particularly unpleasant celebrity years ago, a woman in the entertainment industry who was so insufferable, the journalist joked she'd have preferred the company of a war criminal. The photo that ran with the article seemed innocuous at first glance, but a small detail gave it away. The skin around the celebrity's armpits had bunched up slightly, creating a crinkled, aging texture. When the piece was published, the star was furious. Officially, her complaints were about the tone of the article or a supposed misquote, but the journalist knew better. It wasn't the words, it was the photo that wounded her vanity. That's how it usually goes. People rarely admit that their outrage stems from insecurity. They focus on headlines, quotes, or interpretations, pretending their fury is intellectual rather than personal. But for those who work in the media, the truth is easy to recognize. The louder and more emotional the backlash, the more likely it is that an image, not the writing, hit the nerve. And while unflattering photos can provoke anyone, their use often reveals bias in how subjects are treated. Men, especially powerful ones, tend to get a pass more often, or at least the benefit of the doubt. But women, particularly actresses and public figures, are more frequently targeted. Actress Olivia Colman once spoke candidly about this in an interview, describing how photographers on red carpets deliberately angle their lenses to capture unflattering shots. "They're always trying to get photos up under your chin," she said. "Then everyone comments and says awful things, and you think, F asterisk 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 off. I wasn't born a supermodel, I've had 3 children, my body's stretched, and bits have drooped, it's not fair. And she's right, it isn't fair. A photo can be a cruel weapon, wielded with plausible deniability. Editors can always claim it was the best shot available, or that it captured the real moment. But often, the choice is intentional, even strategic. It's a silent jab, a visual insult disguised as journalism. Trump, for all his bluster, understands this language better than most. He's a man who built his public image on appearances, the golden towers, the tailored suits, the self-consciously styled hair, all of it designed to project power and control. To see that image undermined, even subtly, cuts to the core of what he values most. His rage at the Time cover wasn't just about vanity, it was about losing control of his narrative, about being seen in a way he couldn't manipulate or approve. In that sense, Trump's fury is almost poetic. Here is a man who has long used mockery, exaggeration, and visual performance as tools of dominance, now undone by the same tactics. The camera, that ever watchful eye, finally caught him off guard. And as he complained about his missing hair and tiny crown, the irony was inescapable. The master of image manipulation, momentarily powerless against an image of himself. It's tempting to shrug and say he deserves it. Maybe he does. Yet his reaction reveals a universal truth, that image and ego are inseparable in public life. For politicians, celebrities, and even ordinary people on social media, photos hold a strange power. They can build myths or shatter them. They can inspire pride, humiliation, or fury. And in Trump's case, they can turn a glowing profile into a perceived insult. In the end, the Time magazine cover may be remembered less for its article than for the uproar it caused. The text celebrated a diplomatic success, but the image told a different story, one of fragility, vanity, and insecurity. And maybe that's the real triumph here, not Trump's, but the photo editors. It always starts with the photo. You can write 1,000 words filled with reason, balance, and craft, but it is the single image that people remember. Words fade, paragraphs dissolve into the blur of opinion. But a photograph, especially one that catches the subject off guard, can ignite emotions that no headline ever could. It's strange how, in the world of journalism, truth often arrives not through the sentences we labor over but through the frozen expression of a face caught mid-breath. It's in that moment of unfiltered humanity that reputations are either burnished or broken. And this week, that unrelenting power of the photo was laid bare in the uproar surrounding Donald Trump and the now infamous Time magazine cover that set him off like dry tinder in a gust of wind. The photo was a study in the accidental cruelty of perspective. Taken from below, it offered a full, unapologetic view straight up the former president's nose. The lighting was stark, unflattering, merciless in its honesty. Every crease, every sag, every misbehaving strand of hair was illuminated in high definition. It was the kind of image that strips away the armor of self-presentation and leaves a man exposed. Trump's neck, usually concealed beneath the shield of tailored suits and glowing tan, folded into soft ridges that caught the light like a parched hillside after the snow has melted. His eyes, normally squinting with the assurance of dominance, glinted instead with something reptilian and cold. And his famously elaborate hair, his symbol of vanity, his crown of control, appeared thin, floating, and translucent, like the fragile gauze of an infant's first strands. Trump saw the cover, and predictably, he exploded. In a tirade posted to his Truth Social platform in the early hours of the morning, he accused Time of deliberately sabotaging his image. They disappeared, my hair, he fumed, and then had something floating on top of my head that looked like a floating crown, but an extremely small one. Even for Trump, the complaint was oddly specific, as though he had spent an uncomfortable stretch of time scrutinizing his reflection against the glossy paper. He was outraged, humiliated, fixated not on the article's content but on the perceived insult embedded in that photograph. What made the outburst so strangely human, even relatable, was that in this particular case, Trump wasn't wrong. The floating crown he referred to was merely sunlight flaring behind his head, yet the overall effect of the image was undeniably awkward. The irony, however, was cruelly rich. The headline above the photo was, "His Triumph." The accompanying piece praised his role in brokering a fragile ceasefire in Gaza, describing it as a potential, signature achievement, of his post-presidency influence. Yet none of that mattered to him. The positive coverage was drowned beneath the humiliation of a bad angle. For Trump, the article might as well have been blank text. The only thing that mattered was that picture. And that is how it always goes. The photograph is what lingers. A sentence may be misread or forgotten, but a photo attaches itself to memory like a stain. For anyone else, we might extend sympathy. We all know how it feels to be caught at our worst. The camera is a merciless judge, exposing every insecurity we hide from the mirror. But Trump, who has spent years mocking others, the disabled reporter whose gestures he once cruelly imitated, the women he dismissed with callous remarks, the rivals he reduced to insults about appearance, has little claim to that sympathy. His entire career has been a performance of ridicule, and now, the ridicule